Welcome aboard the journey of the mind's silent scream, where stories are navigated with the precision and heart of StoryWave AI. Chart this course with us by liking and subscribing for daily explorations. Chapter 1: Whispers in the Dark. Salt Lake City's evening breeze carried a chill that seemed to whisper secrets of the unseen, a prelude to the night's silent enigma. The Tanner residence, a modest two-story perched on the edge of a sleepy neighborhood, lay under the watchful gaze of a waxing crescent moon. Jeremy Tanner, known to his friends as Jerry, leaned against his porch railing, his green eyes reflecting the starlit sky. The mechanic in him noted the quiet, too quiet for a city usually vibrant with life. Jerry's attention was drawn to the laughter of children playing nearby. His daughter, Emily, a sprite of a girl with her mother's bright smile, was tossing a ball back and forth with friends by the irrigation ditch. It was an innocuous scene, one of suburban tranquility. Yet, as the light began to fade, a subtle disquiet gnawed at him. The neighborhood had been abuzz with talk of missing pets and inexplicable sounds disturbing the nocturnal peace. Barks and meows had been replaced with a silence that seemed to cloak the streets in apprehension. The community's unease was palpable, a shared tension that tightened with each passing dusk. Jerry. The voice belonged to his neighbor Frank, an elderly man with a penchant for conspiracy theories. "You hear it too, don't ya? Those strange noises at night?" Jerry's gravelly voice broke the silence. "Can't say I have, Frank, but I've been busy with work." "What kind of noises?" Frank leaned in, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Like whispers in the dark, Jerry. Whispers and scratches. It's not natural, I tell ya." Jerry's stoic facade faltered for a moment, his thoughts drifting to Emily's safety. "Keep an eye out, Frank. I don't want anything happening to the kids." "Aye, that's why I'm telling ya." "Something's not right here, Jerry. Mark my words." As the evening wore on, Jerry found himself alone on the porch, Emily and her friends having retreated indoors. The street lamps flickered on, casting elongated shadows that danced with the rustling leaves. The mechanic couldn't shake the sense of foreboding that lingered in the air, a silent sentinel warning of things amiss. He decided to investigate, his athletic build moving with purpose as he patrolled the neighborhood. The houses, once beacons of warmth, appeared as silent guardians over the secrets they held within. The night seemed to close in around him, each step punctuated by the crunch of gravel underfoot. It was then he noticed it, a trail of paw prints leading to the ditch, abruptly ending as if the creature had been plucked from the earth. Jeremy's heart raced, not with fear but with the simmering intensity of a mystery unfolding. The ditch, now a gaping maw in the twilight, seemed to beckon him, the whispers growing ever louder. He peered into the darkness, his senses heightened. The air was laced with the scent of damp earth and something else, something metallic. A shiver ran down his spine as he realized it was the smell of blood. The night erupted with a chatter of sound, a crescendo of discordant notes that shattered the silence. Jeremy spun around, searching for the source. It was then he saw them, shadows flitting between the houses, too quick to be human, too silent to be benign. A cold dread settled in his stomach. This was no mere thief in the night. This was something far more sinister. As he raced back to his house, his mind reeled with the implications. The missing pets, the strange noises, the whispers, they were all connected, and the key lay somewhere in the dark recesses of Salt Lake City's quiet terror. Little did Jeremy know, this was merely the overture to a symphony of horror that would engulf his world, leaving the borders of sanity and vengeance indistinct and blurred. And in the heart of that darkness, a slasher's blade gleamed with malevolent anticipation, ready to carve a path through the unsuspecting city. Chapter 2: The Calm Before the Storm. The town market bustled with activity, a litter of vendors hawking fresh produce and artisanal goods, the air rich with the aroma of baked bread and sweet summer berries. It was here, amid the hive of commerce, that Jeremy and Emily found themselves meandering, a temporary escape from the whispers that had seeped into their lives. "Look, Daddy, apples as big as my head!" Emily's exclamation was a buoy of innocence, drawing a smile from Jeremy's otherwise stoic visage. "They sure are, Pumpkin. Should we get some for the pie you wanted to bake?" Jeremy's voice was a gravelly lullaby that soothed Emily's excitement. Nodding eagerly, Emily skipped ahead, her joy momentarily eclipsing her earlier confessions of a boogeyman's gaze upon her. It was a fear she had voiced in the quiet of her room, a fear that gnawed at Jeremy's resolve. But for now, he shelved his worries, focusing instead on the vibrant life around them. Their exchange was cut short as a figure approached, a man whose presence seemed oddly out of sync with the market's cheer. Arthur Strickland, with his lanky frame and blonde hair that caught the sunlight like strands of straw, offered a smile that did not quite reach his piercing blue eyes. "Fine day for a stroll, isn't it?" Arthur's voice was smooth and persuasive, yet it carried an undercurrent of arrogance that set Jeremy's nerves on edge. "It is," Jeremy replied, his gaze lingering on the jagged scar trailing from Arthur's left eye to his jawline. "Do I know you?" Arthur's laugh was a well-rehearsed melody, devoid of genuine mirth. "Perhaps not yet, but Salt Lake City's a small world. I'm Arthur, Arthur Strickland." Jeremy extended a hand, the mechanic's grip firm and questioning. "Jeremy Tanner. And this is my daughter, Emily." A flicker of interest sparked in Arthur's eyes as he regarded Emily, who hid partially behind her father's leg. "Charming child," he remarked, his glance lingering a beat too long for comfort. As the conversation unfolded, Jeremy's attention was caught by the silver lighter Arthur fidgeted with, a nervous tick that betrayed an inner restlessness. The exchange was punctuated with pleasantries and observations about the weather, the market, and the latest news of Salt Lake City. Yet there was an undercurrent of something unspoken, a dance around a truth neither man was ready to confront. As they parted ways, Jeremy couldn't shake the feeling that this encounter was a foretoken, a quiet before an inevitable deluge of darkness. The day continued, a portrait of father and daughter, framed by laughter and the golden hue of the sun. Yet beneath the surface of this idyll, the seeds of terror took root, germinating in the fertile soil of the unknown. That evening, as the sky donned its twilight mantle, Jeremy watched over Emily, a silent guardian against the night. The calm before the storm was a fragile peace, one that the mind's silent scream would soon shatter with a violence as brutal and unyielding as the slash of a blade in the dark. Chapter 3, Shadow of Innocence. "All right, Em, let's tackle this math problem together," Jeremy said, his fingers stained with the day's toil, a glaring disparity to the pristine pages before him. Emily bit her lip, the numbers and equations swimming before her eyes. "It's like it's written in another language," she murmured, frustration edging her voice. With a patience born from a reservoir of love and exhaustion, Jeremy leaned forward. "Think of it as a puzzle, pumpkin. We just need to find the right pieces to make it fit." Together, they navigated the labyrinth of mathematics, Jeremy's explanations weaving through the air like a lullaby, reducing complex theorems to simple truths. Emily's eyes began to sparkle with understanding, her pencil dancing across the paper as confidence took root. The scene was a tender tableau, a father's dedication interwoven with the remnants of the day's challenges, the worn gears of the machines he repaired, the lingering scent of oil and metal, the weight of responsibility that lay on his shoulders like a mantle. The serenity of the moment was a fragile bulwark against the encroaching night and its hidden terrors. Across town, in the dimly lit corners of Salt Lake City's less traveled streets, Arthur Strickland melded with the shadows, his figure barely distinguishable from the dark. His blue eyes mirrored the chill of the evening, and his mind, a treacherous landscape, roamed places where the light of innocence could not reach. Jeremy, oblivious to the malevolent tide rising outside his doorstep, focused on the here and now. Emily's soft giggle as she finally solved the last problem was a melody that filled the room, a sound that fought back the creeping silence that sought to invade their home. "See, you're a natural," Jeremy praised, his athletic frame easing back into the couch, a sigh escaping his lips. "But it's not as fun as playing outside," Emily countered, her youthful wisdom wrapped in simplicity. "True, but these numbers, they're like little mysteries waiting to be solved, just like the world outside, full of puzzles." As the night deepened, Jeremy tucked Emily into bed, her room a sanctuary adorned with the dreams of a child. Beneath the watchful eyes of stuffed animals and the heroes that graced her posters, she drifted to sleep. Jeremy stood in the doorway, his silhouette framed by the hall light, the stillness of the house a stark reminder of the emptiness beside him, a partner lost to time, leaving him to navigate the tempest of life alone. And as he finally surrendered to his own slumber, the city outside whispered secrets of things unseen, of a darkness that hungered. The stage was set, the players unaware of the tragedy that would soon unfold, a horror that would tear at the fabric of their reality, leaving the shadow of innocence trembling in its wake. Chapter 4: Fractured Reflection. At school, Emily navigated the treacherous waters of childhood, where the monsters were not just under the bed, but walked the halls and whispered behind cupped hands. The taunts about her boogeyman, a spectral figure born from her fears, echoed in the laughter of her peers. "Hey, Em, did your boogeyman help with your homework?" jeered a boy, his voice a serrated edge that sliced through her composure. Emily's chestnut hair veiled her face as she sought refuge in her notebook, her silence a shield against the barrage of ridicule. Yet within her, a defiance smoldered, a flame awaiting the breath of courage to ignite it. Meanwhile, Jeremy stood before his boss, the air in the office stale with the scent of motor oil and dashed hopes. The promotion he had sought, a lifeline to a better life for him and Emily, dangled before him, just out of reach. "Jerry, you're a hell of a mechanic, but we need someone with a bit more finesse for the front office," his boss said, the words as impersonal as the tools that lay on Jeremy's workbench. The sting of rejection was swift, and Jeremy's response was measured, his gravelly voice betraying none of the tempest brewing within. "I understand. Thank you for considering me." The day trudged on, the hours marked by the ticking of the clock and the turning of wrenches. As the sun began its descent, painting the sky in shades of ember and ash, Jeremy's thoughts turned homeward, to Emily and her world of whispered cruelties. At home, father and daughter found solace in shared silence, the unspoken understanding that life sometimes dealt blows that left fractures in their reflections. The kitchen was a sanctuary as they prepared dinner together, the sizzle of the pan a counterpoint to the unvoiced frustrations of their day. "Your grandpa used to say, 'Life's like this sizzling pan. Sometimes it's hot and it hurts, but in the end, it cooks up something good,'" Jeremy said, his words a balm to Emily's unhealed wounds. Emily smiled, her spirit buoyed by the analogy. Did he really say that? In his own way. He wasn't much for words, but he knew how to make a point. The evening waned, and in the quiet moments before bedtime, Emily found her voice, a whisper at first, growing steadier with each word. "Dad, today they laughed at me again." About the boogeyman. Jeremy knelt before her, his presence a bastion against the specters of doubt and fear. "Em, sometimes people don't understand what they can't see. They're afraid too, just in a different way. Are you afraid, Dad? Everyone's afraid of something. But it's how we face it that counts. We can't let fear choose our path." In the shadows of their home, an unseen menace lurked, its presence as real as the steel and rubber Jeremy molded with his calloused hands. The reflection of their world was fractured, the pieces a mosaic of the seen and the unseen, the known and the unknown. As night enveloped the city, the Tanner household slumbered, the scars of the day's battles a confirmation to their stamina. But in the depths of Salt Lake City, where the darkness held sway, the horror slasher unresolved archetypes stirred, ready to shatter the fragile veneer of normalcy with the sharp edge of terror. Chapter 5: A Chilling Discovery. Beneath a sky smeared with the graying light of dawn, an eerie stillness embraced Salt Lake City. The Tanner household, once a bastion of warmth and laughter, was suffocated by a silence that clawed at the soul. Jeremy, his heart pounding with a dread he could not name, approached the irrigation ditch, a sinister scar in the earth that had become the subject of Emily's nightmares. His eyes, once a vibrant green, were now dulled with the weight of sleepless nights and unspoken fears. The mechanic's hands, calloused and accustomed to the certainty of steel and engine oil, trembled as he neared the water's edge. The air was thick with anticipation, each of Jeremy's steps a leaden march towards an unknown horror. "Emily." The call tore from his throat, a desperate plea that fractured the silence. But the world remained mute, indifferent to the agony of a father's soul laid bare. As the first rays of the sun cut through the morning mist, they revealed an unspeakable tableau. The lifeless form of his daughter, Emily, partially submerged in the murky waters, her innocence forever marred by the brutality of her demise. A guttural cry escaped Jeremy, raw and primal, as he fell to his knees. His hands, instruments of repair and creation, were powerless to mend the most precious thing in his life. The ditch, once a mere footnote in his daily existence, had become the stage for a tragedy that would leave an indelible mark on his being. The siren's lament announced the arrival of the authorities, their blue lights casting macabre shadows on the scene. Detective Marianne Cole approached, her stride purposeful, yet imbued with a sorrow that her years on the force could not mask. "Mr. Tanner, I'm so sorry," Marianne said, her voice a somber melody against the furor of the crime scene. "We're going to do everything we can to find out what happened to Emily." Jeremy's response was a portrait of anguish, his words a torrent of grief and fury. "Do? What can you do? She's gone, and whoever did this is still out there." Marianne's eyes, a compassionate steel blue, met Jeremy's. "We'll start with what we know, gather evidence, and build a case. It's painstaking work, but we won't rest until we have answers." The ensuing hours unfolded like a grotesque ballet, officers and forensic technicians weaving between one another, collecting the silent testimony of the surroundings. Jeremy watched, detached yet trapped in the vortex of his nightmare, as they documented every detail of the cruel canvas upon which his daughter's last moments were painted. "The city's under a dark cloud, Jeremy. People are scared, and now this." "It's like we're up against a ghost," Marianne confided, her voice barely above a whisper, as they stood apart from the flurry of activity. Jeremy's gaze, hollow and haunted, remained fixed on the ditch. "Then we'll pull this ghost into the light, no matter what it takes." As the day gave way to evening, the somber procession of investigators retreated from the Tanner home, leaving behind a silence more profound than before. Jeremy, alone in the husk of his life, faced the twilight of his world with endurance forged in the crucible of his despair. The mind's silent scream echoed through the Tanner residence, a chilling discovery that marked the beginning of Jeremy's descent into the abyss of vengeance. In the coming days, the city would feel the tremors of his wrath, a man driven by the singular purpose of retribution, blurring the lines between justice and madness in his pursuit of the shadow that had snatched away the light of his life. Chapter 6: Echoes of a Nightmare. In the wake of tragedy, the once vibrant Salt Lake City found itself shrouded in a palpable pall of dread. The news of Emily Tanner's brutal end rippled through the community like a malevolent wave, leaving a trail of hushed whispers and sideways glances in its wake. Doors once left unlocked were now bolted tight, and parents held their children a little closer, the specter of violence haunting their every step. Within the heart of this maelstrom of fear, the community hall stood as a lantern of solidarity, its walls echoing with the collective heartbeat of a town united in shock. Jeremy, his visage a ragbag of sorrow and resolve, entered the hall amidst a sea of murmurs. "Did you hear? They're saying it might be someone from around here." A woman's voice trembled, laced with the fear that had become the town's unwanted companion. Her friend leaned in, his words a clandestine murmur. "I heard some folks think it's Jeremy himself. Imagine, a father." The gossip was cut short as Jeremy's presence loomed over them, his stature commanding silence. The murmurs dissipated like fog before the sun, leaving an uncomfortable void. Mayor Helen Jacobs, a stately woman with a reputation for unwavering leadership, called the assembly to order. Her voice, firm yet tinged with grief, filled the room. "We are here to make sense of the senseless, to find light in this darkness. Our community has been violated, and we must stand together." Jeremy, standing among his peers, felt their eyes upon him, eyes filled with sympathy, suspicion, and everything in between. He cleared his throat, the sound a clarion call that demanded attention. "I want to address the elephant in the room," Jeremy began, his voice gravely and laced with a father's anguish. "Some of you think I had something to do with my own daughter's death." The crowd shifted, discomfort written on their faces like a collective confession. "I'm a mechanic, not a public speaker," Jeremy continued, "but I know machines, and I know life. Machines can be fixed, parts replaced, oiled, and mended. Life, once taken, is gone forever. Emily was my life." A hush fell over the crowd, the weight of his words pressing upon their chests. "I vow, in front of all of you today, that I will find who did this." Jeremy's declaration was a firebrand, igniting a mix of emotions in the hearts of the listeners. "I'll do whatever it takes." The mayor interjected, her voice a soothing balm. We are with you, Jeremy. The police are working tirelessly, and we must trust in the process. Detective Marianne Cole, present at the fringes of the gathering, nodded in silent agreement. Her gaze met Jeremy's, an unspoken pledge passing between them. The meeting unfolded, a ragbag of concerns and community planning, but beneath the veneer of action, fear lurked, an insidious shadow that clung to every word, every promise of safety. As the townspeople filed out of the hall, the echoes of the nightmare that had befallen them resonated in the walls, the sorrow and terror, a chorus that would not be silenced. And in the heart of it all, Jeremy stood, a fractured man whose reflection in the glass doors of the community hall bore the marks of a torment that would not ease until justice or vengeance was claimed. Chapter 7: The Monster Within. Jeremy Tanner's shadow loomed large in the dimly lit alleyway where Salt Lake City's underbelly came to life under the cover of night. The once stoic and law-abiding mechanic now walked a path blurred by the mist of vengeance. He had transformed, his once steady hands now balled into fists of retribution, seeking answers in the darkness that had swallowed his daughter whole. The alley's air was thick with the stench of decay and desperation, a miasma that clung to the brick walls and seeped into the souls of those who dared traverse it. This was a place of transactions best left unspoken, where the currency was often pain and silence. "Word is you know things, Mickey," Jeremy said, his voice a gravelly threat that sliced through the humid air. Mickey, a wiry man with a face that bore the map of poor decisions, leaned against the graffiti-marred wall, his eyes darting like a caged animal. "I don't know nothing about your girl, Tanner." I swear, Mickey's voice was a reedy whine, the tremor in his words betraying his fear. Jeremy advanced, the echo of his daughter's laughter haunting his every step. "Don't lie to me. You deal in secrets. It's time you paid up." The confrontation was a dance as old as time, predator and prey locked in a wordless understanding. Jeremy's interrogation grew fervent, his hands gripping Mickey's collar with an iron resolve. The shadows watched, indifferent to the morality play unfolding within their embrace. Mickey's resistance crumbled, his words spilling forth like coins from a slit purse. All right. There's talk, see? Some fella, goes by Art, been asking round about kids. Creep's got a look in his eyes like he's seen the devil." The name struck a chord in Jeremy, a note that resonated with the memory of piercing blue eyes and a jagged scar. Arthur, the traveling salesman who had crossed his path with a predacious charm. Intent on following the thread of truth unraveled by Mickey's admission, Jeremy left the informant gasping in the alley, the imprint of his anger marked upon the man's flesh. The mechanic's inner compass, once guided by an abiding sense of right, now spun wildly, his every action a step into the abyss. The night bore witness to Jeremy's transformation, the city's labyrinthine streets a stage for his relentless pursuit. Each encounter, each bruised knuckle and bloodied lip, stripped away layers of the man he once was, revealing a creature driven by a singular, dark purpose. As dawn threatened to breach the horizon, a cryptic message found its way to Jeremy, the words scrawled on a scrap of paper that fluttered to his feet. "Midnight, Old Foundry." A.S. it read, the initials of Pharos in the tempest of his mind. Jeremy stood before the foundry, its skeletal remains a relic of industry and toil, now a mausoleum for secrets and sins. The air was electric with anticipation, the promise of revelation, a siren's call that he could not resist. The foundry's cavernous interior loomed before him, the silence punctuated by the drip of water and the skittering of unseen creatures. In the heart of this desolate cathedral, Jeremy would come face to face with the monster within, a reflection of his own torment and rage. And somewhere in the shadows, the true monster watched, its malevolent gaze fixed upon the man who sought to unearth the horrors it had sown. The line between hunter and hunted blurred, the mind's silent scream a chorus that echoed through the bones of the city, an indicator of the darkness yet to come. Chapter 8: A Trail of Shadows. Beneath the cloak of night, the city's heart beat with a rhythm of caution, its streets awash with the dim glow of streetlights. Jeremy, his silhouette merged with the darkness, watched from his car, eyes fixed on the desolate playground that rumor had marked as a hunting ground for the unseen predator. The playground, once filled with the joyful squeals of children, now lay silent, the swings still, the slides untraveled. It was a stage set for nightmares. The sand pit, a barren desert under the crescent moon's watchful eye. Across town, the garage was alive with the clamor of metal and the stench of oil, but one workbench stood unused, tools lying in wait for a mechanic whose hands were now preoccupied with the unraveling of a darker mystery. Frank, his brow furrowed with concern, approached Jerry's closest colleague, Tom. "Has Jerry said anything to you? About where he's been?" Frank's question cut through the din of the garage. Tom wiped his hands on a rag, the grease staining the fabric like a Rorschach test. "Nah, he's clammed up, ever since." His voice trailed off, the unsaid heavy in the air. "He's my friend, Tom. I'm worried he's losing himself to this thing." Tom nodded, his expression grim. "I know what you mean, Frank, but what can we do? It's like he's driven by something we can't understand." Back at the playground, Jeremy's vigil remained unbroken, the hours stretching into an eternity of waiting and watching. His focus never wavered. Each shadow that moved, each rustle of leaves, a potential harbinger of the horror he sought. The night waned, and as the first blush of dawn crept across the sky, a figure emerged from the tree line, a man whose gait was both familiar and unsettling. Jeremy's pulse quickened. It was Arthur, his outline etched against the awakening day. Jeremy's breath fogged the car window as he fought the urge to confront the man then and there. Instead, he watched as Arthur made his way to the playground, his movements deliberate, his head swiveling as if searching for something or someone. Arthur's hands delved into his coat pockets, withdrawing something that glinted coldly in the newborn light. Jeremy's grip tightened on the steering wheel, his knuckles white, his will like iron. A voice shattered the silence of the car. "You're going to get yourself killed, Jerry." Jeremy turned to see Marianne, her features etched with the same lines of worry that marred his own. She'd slipped into the passenger seat unnoticed, an affirmation to her skill as a detective. "I have to do this, Marianne." "I'm so close now," Jeremy whispered, his eyes never leaving Arthur's figure in the distance. Marianne sighed, the sound carrying the weight of her position and her concern for the man beside her. "This is bigger than you, Jeremy. If you go down this road, there's no coming back." A silence hung between them, fraught with the gravity of choices yet to be made and the ghosts of decisions past. "I'll come back," Jeremy finally said, his voice a low promise, "but only when I've made him pay." As Arthur disappeared from view, Jeremy made his choice. He stepped out of the car, his every step toward the playground, a descent into the abyss that had claimed his daughter. Marianne watched him go, her heart heavy with the knowledge that the path he walked was one of no return. The city awoke to the ordinary, the extraordinary hidden in plain sight. But for Jeremy, the trail of shadows he followed was leading ever closer to a confrontation that would shatter the veneer of normalcy and expose the monster within. Chapter 9, Maze of Deceptions. The night was a shroud over Salt Lake City, the moon a mere sliver of light against the obsidian shamble of the sky. Jeremy navigated the city's arteries, the labyrinthine streets a reflection of the turmoil within his mind. He was following a lead, a whisper of information that had come his way, a name that promised the closure he was so desperate for. He parked his car outside a rundown apartment complex, the building a monolith of despair in the otherwise mundane neighborhood. The stench of decay seeped from its walls, a stark testament to the rot that lay within. Jeremy's heart pounded, a drumbeat that synced with the urgency of his mission. The suspect's door loomed before him, its battered surface a barrier to the truth he sought. With a steadiness that belied his inner chaos, Jeremy forced the lock, his entry as silent as the doubts that shadowed his every move. The apartment was a maelstrom of filth and disarray, the air choked with the ghosts of untold transgressions. He found his suspect, a figure huddled in the corner, eyes wild with the instinctual recognition of a predator cornered. "Where is she?" Jeremy's voice was a tempest, his demands thunderous in the stillness of the room. "Who? I don't know what you're talking about." The suspect's protestations were a discord of fear and confusion. Jeremy's hands were on him then, the physical manifestation of his grief and wrath. The interrogation was a dance on the edge of a blade, each question a step closer to the abyss. "I saw you near the playground. You're involved. Tell me what you did to her." Jeremy's roar filled the room, his desperation a palpable force. "I swear, I wasn't there. I'm just a junkie, man. I don't know anything about any girl. The suspect's words were a plea, a lifeline thrown into the storm of Jeremy's fury. But the truth, when it came, was a cold shower over the flames of Jeremy's vengeance. The man was no killer, his alibi a fortress of credibility that crumbled Jeremy's accusations to dust. The realization was a gut punch, the breath of life whooshing from Jeremy's lungs. He stumbled back, his near-death grip on the suspect loosening, the room suddenly spinning with the vertigo of his mistake. Meanwhile, Detective Marianne Cole pored over case files, her eyes weary but determined. The pattern was emerging, a sinister thread that connected Salt Lake City to a series of crimes in neighboring states. "Marianne, look at this," her partner, Detective John Ricks, said, pointing to a map dotted with pushpins. Each pin was a marker, a breadcrumb in the trail of a monster. "We're not dealing with a lone incident. This is methodical, calculated. It's the same MO, Marianne said, her voice a mix of horror and resolve. The subterranean currents of the investigation were converging, revealing a conglomerate of horror that stretched beyond the city limits. Back in the squalor of the apartment, Jeremy released his captive, the weight of his error a shackle around his ankle. The suspect, once a target, was now a specter of Jeremy's misjudgment, the encounter a fractured mirror that reflected the monster Jeremy was becoming. The night reclaimed its silence, the city a maze of deceptions where the truth was a minotaur waiting at the center. Jeremy's descent into chaos was a path littered with the shards of his own humanity, and with each step, the stakes grew higher, the shadows deeper, and the mind's silent scream more deafening. Chapter 10. The Breaking Point. The chill that had settled over Salt Lake City was more than the mere absence of heat. It was a cold that seeped into the marrow, a forecaster of the darkness that had taken root in its streets. As dawn broke, casting a pale light on the weary city, a second victim was discovered in a scene that mirrored the grim tableau of Emily's End. The community, already teetering on the edge of terror, found itself peering into an abyss that yawned ever wider. At the center of this maelstrom stood Jeremy, his psyche splintering under the relentless pursuit of an elusive specter. Once a pillar of the community, his actions now cast long shadows of doubt among the people who had known him as a friend and neighbor. Whispers of fear and suspicion wove through the town like threads in a sinister conglomerate. In the local diner, where the aroma of coffee and fried breakfasts once signified the start of another day of benign routine, the atmosphere was now thick with apprehension. Patrons spoke in murmurs as Jeremy entered, his presence a catalyst for the tension that hummed in the air. "Jerry, man, you gotta ease up." "People are starting to talk," said Bill, the diner's owner, as he approached Jeremy with a furrowed brow. Jeremy's response was terse, his voice a rasp of fatigue and frustration. "Let them talk. I've got more important things to worry about than gossip." The conversation was a tightrope walk between concern and accusation. Bill's attempts at calming Jeremy met with an ironclad tenacity that bordered on obsession. "Look, I know you're hurting, but you're scaring folks. They're starting to say you might be involved," Bill pressed, his words an evidence to the community's fraying trust. Jeremy's laugh was devoid of humor, a hollow sound that echoed off the diner's walls. "Involved? I'm trying to find the monster responsible, not become one." The exchange was cut short as the diner's television, perpetually tuned to the local news, announced the latest development. Police are investigating a possible link between the recent tragedies and a series of unsolved murders across the state, the newscaster intoned, her face a mask of professional concern. In the precinct, Detective Marianne Cole and her partner, Detective Ricks, pored over the growing file of evidence, the connective tissue of the crimes revealing the workings of a methodical killer. "We've got a pattern, Marianne. Different towns, same MO. It's him. It has to be," Rick said, his finger tracing the line of pushpins on the map that sprawled across the table. Marianne's eyes were steel traps, locking onto each piece of data with an intensity that belied the fatigue that clung to her like a second skin. "We need to catch this guy before he strikes again. This is bigger than any of us realized." Meanwhile, Jeremy's hunt had drawn the attention of law enforcement, his recent activities painting him in a light that was hard to ignore. As he left the diner, The sight of police cruisers pulling up sent a jolt of adrenaline coursing through his veins. Instinct took over, and he slipped into the alleyways, his movements a blend of desperation and street-honed cunning. The chase was a jagged rhythm, a bedlam of shouting officers and the pounding of boots on asphalt. Jeremy, fueled by a cocktail of fear and determination, was a wraith flitting through the city's veins, narrowly evading the grasp of the law. Breathless and undeterred, Jeremy eventually emerged onto the outskirts of town, the skyline a jagged silhouette against the encroaching night. He knew his time was running out, the net drawing tighter with each passing moment. But the monster that lurked in the shadows was still out there, and Jeremy's tenacity to unmask the horror that had shattered his world was unbroken. As the city held its breath, the night settled in, a shroud of unease that blanketed the streets. Jeremy, a man on the brink, stood alone against the coming darkness, his mind a battlefield where the forces of sanity and madness clashed in a relentless struggle. The breaking point loomed, an event horizon from which there could be no return, and the silent scream of a mind pushed to the edge echoed in the void. Chapter 11. Through the Looking Glass. The dim glow of the overhead light cast shadows that seemed to play tricks on his eyes, but the focus of his attention was unyielding, a series of receipts and itineraries that traced Arthur's movements as a traveling salesman. The pattern was emerging, a constellation of stops that mirrored the string of horrors that had plagued the community. A knock at the door jolted Jeremy from his scrutiny. He rose to answer, finding Frank, his neighbor and confidant, standing on the threshold, a look of solemn concern on his weathered face. "Jeremy, you mind if I come in?" Frank's voice was a low rumble, his eyes searching Jeremy's, looking for the man he once knew. Jeremy stepped aside, the welcome a silent agreement to the unspoken pact of friendship. "Of course. What's on your mind, Frank?" As they settled at the table, Frank's gaze fell upon the labyrinthine display of evidence. "I've been hearing things, Jerry. People are scared, not just of what's happening, but of you. What you're becoming." Jeremy's hands paused, a receipt held like a fragile truth between his fingers. "I'm the same man, Frank. Just focused on a goal. Emily deserves that much." Frank leaned forward, his voice a steady current. "Focused or obsessed? There's a fine line there, and I'm worried you're crossing it." The conversation that followed was a dance of perspectives, two men trying to find common ground amidst the chaos that had engulfed their lives. Jeremy's every word was a declaration to his daughter's memory, while Frank's replies were etched with the wisdom of one who had seen too much of life's darker side. "Look at this," Jeremy said, pointing to a marked calendar. "The dates of Arthur's sales trips line up with the incidents. He's been in every town, Frank. It can't be a coincidence." Frank's eyes narrowed as he followed Jeremy's reasoning, the implications dawning on him like a slow sunrise. If you're right, then this guy's been hiding in plain sight, using his job as a cover. It was a revelation that sent a chill down both their spines, the realization that the boogeyman they feared had a name and a face, one that had smiled and sold them their wares. Meanwhile, in the precinct's fluorescent-lit warren of offices, Marianne and Rick stood before a sprawling corkboard, their latest findings casting a web of connections that spanned beyond their jurisdiction. "We've got cases from 3 other states, Marianne. Same pattern, same MO, Rick said, his finger tracing the lines that linked the Env to their current nightmare. Marianne's mind raced, her detective's intuition weaving the threads into a shamble of predation and malice. This is the work of a serial killer, and he's been using his job to scout his next targets. The subplot was thickening, the detectives finding themselves in a race against time as they pieced together the mosaic of a murderer's journey. Back at Jeremy's house, the gravity of their discovery weighed heavily on the room. Jeremy stood, a renewed sense of purpose lighting his eyes. "I have to confront him, Frank. I have to end this." Frank's hand found Jeremy's shoulder, a grounding force. "Be careful, Jerry. This isn't just about you anymore. It's about stopping a monster." The city outside lay in a deceptive slumber, unaware of the forces moving within its shadows. Jeremy, with the breaking point behind him and the abyss ahead, stepped through the looking glass into a world where the line between hunter and hunted was as thin as the veil between sanity and madness. The silent scream that had begun in his mind was now a roar in his ears, and the descent into chaos had reached a new, perilous depth. Chapter 12: The Hunter and the Hunted. In the underbelly of a city plagued by shadows, a new game of lethal intent had begun. Arthur, with his straw-blonde hair almost luminescent in the moonlight, moved through the darkness with the ease of one who has become the embodiment of fear itself. The knowledge of Jeremy's relentless pursuit had reached him, an insidious whisper in the wind, and in response, he had begun to weave a web of deceit and danger. Arthur's traps were not the primitive snares of a novice. They were intricate and psychological, designed to prey on the mind as much as the body. Salt Lake City became a chessboard. The pieces moved with a cold and calculating precision. Jeremy, aware that every step could be his last, advanced with a caution born from the cumulative horror of his quest. His once methodical mind, tempered by years of mechanical exactitude, was now a sharpened instrument of survival. As Jeremy moved through an abandoned warehouse district, his steps echoed in the cavernous emptiness, each sound a potential herald of his discovery. He paused, his instincts screaming alarm, and not a moment too soon. A thin wire, nearly invisible in the dimness, stretched across his path, a precursor of the lethal ingenuity Arthur possessed. "Close call, Jerry," murmured a voice from the shadows. It was Frank, who had followed Jeremy, driven by a blend of concern and an unspoken duty to watch his friend's back. Jeremy's response was terse, his green eyes scanning the darkness. "I appreciate it, but this isn't your fight." Frank's chuckle was a low rumble in the silence. "Someone's got to keep you from becoming a ghost in this ghost town." Their exchange was cut short as a sound reverberated through the empty warehouses, a clatter of something falling. The two men tensed, their bodies coiled springs ready to react. "Stay sharp," Jeremy whispered, the scant light glinting off the determination etched into his features. The police, meanwhile, were a force unto themselves, a tide of blue that swept through the city's veins with unrelenting tenacity. Detective Marianne Cole led the charge, her intuition a warning signal that guided their efforts. "We've got two targets now, Jeremy and our killer. They're linked somehow, and we're going to untangle this mess," Marianne declared to her assembled team. Detective Ricks nodded, his eyes fixed on the map that had become an oddment of their investigation. "And we're closing in. The net is tightening. The chase was a symphony of near misses and narrow escapes, the city a stage upon which the hunter and the hunted played their roles with deadly seriousness. Jeremy, fueled by a mix of grief and vengeance, was a formidable adversary, his every move a counterpoint to Arthur's machinations. It was in the shadow of the dilapidated foundry that Jeremy turned the tables. Arthur, confident in his position as the puppet master, failed to anticipate the ferocity of a man with nothing left to lose. Jeremy's voice cut through the gloom, a challenge that resonated off the rusted metal and broken glass. "Come out, Arthur. It's time to end this." The ensuing silence was a canvas upon which the tension painted itself in stark relief. Then a figure emerged, the silhouette of a man whose very presence was a chilling affirmation of the evil that walked among them. Arthur's voice was a serpent's hiss, a sound that sent shivers down the spine. "You think you can stop me, Jeremy? I am the night, the whisper in the dark that no one can silence." Their confrontation was a dance of fate, two figures cast in a tableau of predation and retribution. Jeremy, with every fiber of his being screaming for justice, matched Arthur's every move with a predator's grace. The foundry became their arena, the clang of their struggle a macabre melody that rose to join the chorus of the night. And as they circled, locked in their deadly game, the police closed in, drawn by the warning signal of their conflict. Detectives Marianne and Ricks, leading their team, arrived just as Jeremy disarmed Arthur, the clash of wills reaching its crescendo. The officers' shouts added to the turmoil, their weapons drawn as they assessed the chaos before them. "Police, don't move." Marianne's command was a thunderclap in the stillness that followed the struggle. Jeremy and Arthur stood frozen, the hunter and the hunted now united in their confrontation with the law. The foundry, with its labyrinth of shadows and echoes, bore witness to the outcome of a chase that had torn through the fabric of their lives. The chapter closed with the clink of handcuffs and the murmur of Miranda rights. the city holding its breath as the mind's silent scream reached its peak, a crescendo of justice and retribution that would echo long after the dawn. Chapter 13, Convergence of Shadows. "Tell me why," Jeremy demanded, his voice echoing in the vast emptiness of the space, rebounding off the cold, unfeeling concrete and rusted metal. Arthur, his blonde hair matted with sweat and grime, lifted his head to meet Jeremy's intense stare. "Why what? Why I chose them. Why you couldn't protect her." Arthur's words were a vile poison, each syllable dripping with malice. Their conversation was a twisted dance, a psychological battle that waged with the ferocity of their physical struggle. Jeremy, with each passing moment, found himself slipping further into the abyss, the darkness within clawing its way to the surface. "You think you're better than me, Jeremy? You think you're the hero in this story?" Arthur's laugh was a chilling sound that skittered across the walls and burrowed into Jeremy's soul. Jeremy's response was a visceral growl, the sound of a man on the edge. "I'm nothing like you." Yet, as he uttered the words, a shard of doubt pierced his conviction. The methods he employed, the lengths to which he'd go for answers, where was the line between justice and monstrosity? Outside, the world remained oblivious to the storm brewing within the warehouse. But not all were unaware. Detectives Marianne and Rix, following the breadcrumbs of their case, found themselves drawn to the same desolate location. The convergence of their investigation with Jeremy's dark crusade was imminent. "We're close," Marianne stated, her eyes scanning the derelict buildings as they drove. "All leads point here." Rix nodded, the weight of the case a heavy cloak upon his shoulders. "Let's just hope we're not too late." Inside, the air was thick with tension, the stench of sweat and fear pungent in the stagnant atmosphere. Jeremy, his morality fraying at the edges, subjected Arthur to a barrage of questions, each more pointed than the last. His hands, once tools for fixing engines, now instruments of a more sinister trade. "Where are the others, Arthur? What did you do with them?" The urgency in Jeremy's voice was a razor's edge, cutting to the heart of his torment. Arthur, his blue eyes reflecting a perverse glee, remained a sphinx. "The others are gone, Jeremy. Gone where you can't touch them, can't save them." The revelation was a gut punch, a blow that sent Jeremy reeling. His hands, now agents of his internal chaos, moved of their own accord, the line between man and monster blurred beyond recognition. As Jeremy's humanity eroded with each passing second, the detectives arrived, their presence a silent alarm that went unnoticed by the two men locked in their grim pas-de-deux. Marianne and Rix moved with practiced stealth, their approach a silent wraith in the shadows. The warehouse door creaked on its hinges, a minor chord in the symphony of suspense. Marianne's silhouette appeared in the doorway, her figure a pronounced polarity against the light from outside. "Jeremy Tanner, step away from the suspect." Her command was a thunderclap that shattered the fragile bubble of their confrontation. Jeremy froze, his bloodied hands pausing in midair, the reality of his actions crashing down upon him like the relentless waves of a furious sea. The chapter closed with Arthur smirking triumphantly, even in captivity, as the detectives intervened. Jeremy, his face a canvas of anguish and realization, stood at the precipice of his own inner darkness, teetering on the edge of the abyss he had fought so hard to avoid. The convergence of shadows had reached its zenith, and the descent into chaos was now a path paved with shattered illusions and splintered souls. Chapter 14, In the Belly of the Beast. The warehouse loomed like a specter, its cavernous belly echoing with the sins of the city. Jeremy stood in the midst of this desolation, his figure a stolid silhouette against the backdrop of decay. Across the room, Arthur, bound and subdued, was a portrait of desperation, his fate sealed by the hands of a man who had once lived by the creed of repair, not ruin. "You don't have to do this, Jeremy," Arthur rasped, his voice a hoarse whisper that betrayed the onset of his own terror. Jeremy's response was a stoic silence, his backbone manifesting in the tightening of his jaw, the hard set of his shoulders. The conversation between them had dwindled, words becoming as sparse as the rations he had left for Arthur, meager sustenance that would only prolong the inevitable. "You call this justice?" Arthur continued, the question hanging in the air like a specter of doubt. Is this what she would have wanted? The mention of Emily, a name that carried the weight of innocence lost, was a blade that twisted in Jeremy's heart. Yet the pain it elicited was no longer enough to sway him from his course. "Justice," Jeremy finally uttered, his voice a low rumble that filled the space. "Justice is a luxury. What I seek is retribution." The dialogue between hunter and prey was a dark mirror of the societal contract that had been shattered by violence. Jeremy, whose moral compass had once been unerringly fixed on the path of righteousness, now navigated a landscape where the compass spun wildly, the distinction between right and wrong obscured by the shadows of his grief. Arthur's pleas became more fervent as the hours passed, an agonizing symphony of bargaining and beseeching that fell upon deaf ears. Jeremy's departure from the warehouse was the final act of a play written in anguish, a silent exit that left behind a man ensnared in the web of his own making. Detectives Marianne and Rix, their own journey fraught with the urgency of the hunt, arrived too late. The warehouse door, a barrier that had once stood sentinel over the city's industrial heart, now swung open with a mournful creak. "What have we got?" Rix asked, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, revealing the detritus of human cruelty. Marianne, her senses attuned to the vestiges of the scene before them, moved with a deliberate grace. "The end of the road," she replied, her voice betraying the weight of their grim discovery. The remnants of Jeremy's calculated vengeance lay before them, evidence of a man pushed beyond the brink, where the line between victim and perpetrator had been irrevocably blurred. Arthur, a husk of a man, was the silent testament to the cost of vengeance, his life a candle snuffed out by the exhalation of Jeremy's wrath. As the detectives processed the scene, the warehouse seemed to absorb the gravity of the moment, its walls a mausoleum for the justice that had been so desperately sought and so darkly wrought. "In the belly of the beast," Marianne murmured, her words a reflection of the darkness that had swallowed them all. The chapter closed with the echo of footsteps, the detectives retreating from the hollow that had once held the heart of a man named Jeremy, now a shadow that danced on the edge of the law and the abyss of his own making. The mind's silent scream had reached its zenith, the descent into chaos complete, leaving behind only the chilling silence of a beast that had consumed itself. Chapter 15, Ghosts of the Past. Jeremy, his stature once commanding and assured, now bore the hunched burden of a man laden with unspoken regrets. He stood apart from the mourners, a solitary figure grappling with the moral quagmire of his recent past. His journey had brought a semblance of peace to the townsfolk, yet within him the tempest raged on, a silent scream that echoed the title of the very horror he had lived. Reverend Matthews, a man whose wisdom was etched into the deep lines of his kindly face, presided over the service with a voice that seemed to carry the weight of the congregation's collective heartache. "We are gathered here not to mark the end of a life, but to acknowledge the profound impact one precious soul has left in her wake," he intoned, his words a balm to the raw edges of the community's grief. As the Reverend spoke, the assembly's attention was a rapt hodgepodge woven from threads of loss and the fragile tendrils of moving forward. Jeremy listened, his ears catching every syllable, yet his thoughts were a tumultuous sea, crashing against the shores of his conscience. Frank, standing with the throng of mourners, glanced over at Jeremy, his eyes a well of unspoken support. He whispered to his wife Ellen, a soft murmur meant only for her. "It's tearing him apart, Elle. He's never going to be the same after this." Ellen's reply was a quiet lament, her words barely audible above the chorus of sobs and sniffles that punctuated the funeral air. "None of us will, Frank. This whole ordeal's left scars on all of us." Their exchange was a poignant reminder of the collective suffering that had enveloped the town, the shared ordeal that had tested the limits of their humanity. As the service drew to a close and the final prayers were uttered, Detective Marianne Cole approached Jeremy with a measured step, her keen eyes softening as they met his. "Jeremy, may I have a moment?" she asked, her voice a gentle intrusion into his private grief. Jeremy nodded, the motion barely perceptible as he turned to face her. Marianne's next words were a careful blend of professional detachment and personal concern. "I wanted to say, the bravery you showed, it made a difference. But there's something else, something you should know." The air between them grew heavy, charged with the weight of unsaid implications. "We have reasons to believe there might have been someone else involved." An accomplice, perhaps. Jeremy's reaction was a subtle freeze, a stillness that belied the maelstrom within. An accomplice? His voice, when it came, was a hollow echo of his former resolve. Marianne nodded. We're following leads, but I thought you should be aware. This might not be over. The notion of a lingering threat, a shadow yet cast over the fragile peace they had all fought to reclaim, was a chilling prospect. As the mourners began to dissipate, each lost in their thoughts and reflections, Jeremy stood motionless, the ghost of his past actions a heavy shroud upon his shoulders. The community had come together to seek closure, to heal the wounds left by an unseen terror. Yet as the moment closed on the day's somber events, the detective's words were a forecaster of the false hope that had settled upon them. The final horror of their ordeal, it seemed, was yet to be unveiled, the mind's silent scream far from its concluding act. Chapter 16, Veil of Shadows. In the quiet suburb of Salt Lake City, the hushed whispers of dread began anew. The news of another child, spirited away under a moonless sky, rippled through the community, reigniting the embers of a fear thought extinguished. This fresh disappearance was a sinister echo of the past, a melody of terror that the townsfolk believed had been silenced. At the local police station, Detective Marianne Cole pored over the new case file, the stark white paper, a jarring contrast to the dark revelations scrawled upon it. She sat across from her partner, Detective Ricks, whose furrowed brow spoke volumes of their shared concern. It's happening again, isn't it? Ricks's question was rhetorical, the answer hanging in the air, a specter none dared to name. Marianne's fingers traced the lines of the report as if by understanding the curve of each letter, she could unravel the mystery before them. This can't be a coincidence. The MO, the profile, it matches. Their discourse was a meticulous dissection of facts and theories, each possibility a thread in the intricate web of their investigation. The pattern was undeniable, a cruel design that suggested a malevolent hand still at play. We need to consider the possibility that Arthur wasn't acting alone, Marianne stated, her analytical mind piecing together the puzzle with a cold precision. Ricks leaned back in his chair, the creak of leather punctuating the gravity of her suggestion. An accomplice or a copycat. Either way, we've got a predator on the loose. Meanwhile, Jeremy wrestled with the shadows of his own making. He sat in the solitude of his living room, the silence a suffocating blanket that threatened to smother the remnants of his sanity. The possibility that his retribution had been meted out upon only one of a pair of monsters was a bitter pill, a toxic truth that eroded his already fragile grasp on reality. The doorbell's chime was a clarion call that pierced the stillness, heralding the arrival of Frank, whose steady presence had become a lifeline in the maelstrom of Jeremy's existence. "Jeremy, have you seen the news?" Frank's voice was a low rumble, the urgency clear in his tone. News? Jeremy's question was hollow, a man adrift in the vast ocean of his torment. Another kid, gone, just like before. The weight of Frank's words settled upon them, a tangible presence in the room. A silence ensued, the two men locked in a wordless communion of fear and frustration. Finally, Jeremy found his voice, a whisper that carried the force of a scream. "I thought it was over, Frank. I thought I had ended it." Frank's hand found its way to Jeremy's shoulder, a gesture of solidarity in the face of an unknowable threat. "We don't know if it's related, not for sure, but it's a damn cruel twist of fate." Back at the station, Marianne and Ricks reviewed the surveillance footage, their eyes sharp for any clue that might break the case wide open. And then, there it was, a shadow within shadows, a figure that moved with an eerie familiarity. "Got you," Ricks breathed, his finger jabbing at the screen. "This has to be our guy." Marianne's gaze was unyielding, her mind racing with the implications. "We need to move fast. This isn't just about catching a killer anymore. It's about preventing a legacy of horror." The chapter drew to a close with the convergence of fear and determination, the Salt Lake City community once again ensnared by the specter of a predator that lurked in the veil of shadows. The false hope of security had been shattered, and now, as the final horror loomed large, the silent scream of a city held captive by fear echoed into the night, a chilling prelude to the darkness still to come. Chapter 17, Resonance of Fear. Salt Lake City, a mosaic of urban sprawl and quiet neighborhoods, wrestled with a chilling silence that settled upon its streets like a shroud. The tranquility that had once been taken for granted was now a haunting reminder of the fragility of peace. Within this uneasy calm, Jeremy's existence became a solitary vigil, each day a stark echo of the emptiness that gnawed at his soul. The garage where he had spent countless hours mending the broken and tuning the weary stood abandoned, its tools untouched, gathering dust and cobwebs. Jeremy had become a shadow, a figure whose presence in the town was more of a memory than a reality. Frank made his way through the desolate workspace, the absence of his friend a tangible void. He stopped at Jeremy's workbench, now a sepulcher of unfinished projects and rusting ambition. With a sigh that carried the weight of unspoken sorrow, Frank picked up a wrench, its surface cold and unyielding. Never thought I'd see the day when this place would feel so empty, Frank murmured to himself, his words swallowed by the silence. Ellen, accompanying him, placed a gentle hand on his arm. "He's still here, Frank, just not in the way we remember." Their exchange was a lamentation, a shared grief for the man Jeremy had been and the specter he had become. They spoke of the community's struggle to comprehend the darkness that had seeped into their lives, a malevolence that defied understanding. Evil like that, it doesn't just go away, it leaves marks, scars on everyone it touches, Frank observed, his gaze lost in the mid-distance of contemplation. And on some, those scars run deeper, Ellen added, her voice a whisper of empathy for the broken man who had borne the heaviest burden. In the quiet of his self-imposed exile, Jeremy's days were spent wrestling with the ghosts of his actions. The room that had once been Emily's sanctuary now stood as a mausoleum to her memory, the walls adorned with her drawings, the air still perfumed with the faintest trace of her laughter. Here Jeremy sought solace, a communion with the past that offered no absolution. Detective Marianne Cole stood before the precinct's board of unsolved cases, her eyes scanning the faces and names that represented the city's unresolved wounds. Her partner, Rix, joined her, his expression grim. "We keep going, Marianne. There's someone out there pulling the strings, and we're going to find them," Rix affirmed, his staunchness a steel thread woven through the fabric of their duty. Marianne nodded, her determination a match for his. "Yes, we will. The cycle of violence ends with us. We owe it to the victims, to the town, to Jeremy." Their pledge was a vow made in the face of an enemy that lurked in the shadows, a sinister force that threatened to perpetuate the cycle of fear and loss. The detective's conversation was a battle cry, a refusal to allow the darkness to claim any more of Salt Lake City's soul. As the journey drew to a close, Jeremy sat in the fading light of Emily's room, his figure a study in desolation. The resonance of fear that had once driven him now held him captive, a prisoner of the unresolved aftermath that clung to him like a second skin. The town continued its uneasy existence, the specter of the unknown, a constant companion. The mind's silent scream, though muffled by the veneer of normalcy, was ever present, a haunting melody that underscored the reality that some evils may never be fully understood or conquered. Chapter 18, The Silent Scream. Salt Lake City, under the weight of an overcast sky, seemed to hold its breath. The streets lay hushed, as if in reverence to the memory of the tragedy that had unfolded within its embrace. Yet, within the precinct's walls, a sense of urgency hummed through the air, electrifying the space with the promise of revelations yet to come. Detective Marianne Cole sat at her desk, her eyes intent on the file before her. The case, a shamble of horrors, had woven itself into the very fabric of her being. Her partner, Detective Rix, approached with a deliberate gait, his hand clutching an evidence bag that held within it a new piece of the puzzle. "Marianne, you're going to want to see this," Rix said, his voice carrying the gravity of their grim occupation. Marianne's gaze met his, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. She accepted the bag, her fingers deftly unsealing it to reveal its contents. A note, its letters scrawled in a hand that seemed to tremble with malice. "What does it say?" Rix asked, leaning in to decipher the cryptic message. Marianne read aloud, each word a herald of dread. "The scream has been silenced, but the echo remains." It doesn't bode well. Their conversation turned to the implications of the note, a dialogue that dissected the meaning and sought to glean insight from the ominous words. "This could mean there's more to come," that whoever's out there isn't finished, Marianne speculated, her mind racing with the possibilities. Rix's reply was a measured rumble, his thoughts aligning with hers. Or it could be a taunt, a way to keep us chasing shadows. We can't let this throw us off. Across town, Jeremy found himself in the sanctuary of his home, the solitude a blatant contrast to the clamor of the city around him. He sat, a figure enveloped in the quietude of his space, the whispers of the past a constant companion. The memory of his daughter Emily and the tragic fate that had befallen her was etched into the very walls of the room. As he pondered the journey that had led him to the edge of darkness and back, a knock at the door pierced the silence. It was Frank, his presence a reminder of the world beyond Jeremy's self-imposed exile. "Jeremy, you can't stay locked away forever," Frank implored, his voice a blend of concern and gentle admonishment. Jeremy's response was a weary sigh, the sound of a man who had walked through the fire and been irrevocably changed. "What's left for me out there, Frank? After everything?" The ensuing exchange was a dance of friendship and healing, the words spoken an indication to the enduring bond between the two men. "There's a future, Jeremy, even if it's hard to see right now." "You've got to believe that," Frank insisted, his conviction a signal in the fog of Jeremy's despair. As the day waned into evening, the note's warning hung in the air, a specter that cast a long shadow over the city's fragile peace. The silent scream of the mind, suppressed but ever present, echoed into the future, where new horrors lay in wait, their contours unseen but palpable. In the quiet of his home, Jeremy considered the possibility of confronting the darkness that lingered, a hint of the fight that still smoldered within his battered spirit. The chapter and the story closed not with an ending, but with the turning of a page. The silent scream of a city and of a man resonated into the unknown, the cycle of violence a refrain that would for now remain unresolved. The stage was set for a return, for a sequel that would beckon the brave to delve once more into the abyss, in search of a silence that was yet to be found. The end. We're glad you were here for the mind's silent scream. With StoryWave AI, your prompts become unforgettable tales. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for daily explorations into storytelling. April 2024. Fare thee well.